I now have the honor of introducing our keynote speaker, Pamela Shifman. She's a longtime advocate for girls and women. Pamela is the executive director of NoVo Foundation from 2008 to 2014. Pamela served as NoVo's foundation director and initiative for girls and women, where she developed the programs and portfolios for grant making for NoVo's girls and women's rights work. Pamela came to NoVo's foundation from UNICEF headquarters, where she led organization efforts to end gender-biased violence in conflicted areas. Prior to joining the UN, Pamela served as a co-executive director of Equal Now, where she focused intensively on trafficking of girls and women and convened a coalition of organizations for passage for the first US legislation on trafficking in person and the UN's Transnational Crime Protocol on Trafficking in Persons. From 1996 to 1998, Pamela served as a legal advisor for ANC's Parliamentary Women's Caucus in South Africa, where she supported development of South Africa's first apartheid legislation addressing domestic violence and led national campaigns on ending violence against girls and women. Pamela is the author of several articles on women's and girls' rights, including Trafficking and Human Rights in Globalized World, Oxfam's Journal of Gender and Development, and Sexual Violence in Conflict and Post-Conflict, a need for more focused action. Pamela is the recipient of the 2011 Lucretia Mott Award from Women's Way and was named one of the 21 leaders of the 21st century by Women's E-News. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Pamela Schiffman.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Hi. Wow. Thank you so much, Amanda, for that introduction. And Jasmine, also, thank you so much for your talk. It was really amazing, both of you. Thank you so much. I am so grateful to be here with all of you today to share some thoughts on the theme of this year's conference, the Year of the Girl. And the ideas I'm going to share today are informed by several defining experiences. First, as Amanda said, I'm currently the executive director of the NoVo Foundation, which is a foundation dedicated to creating a more just and balanced world. And as part of that, we believe that we must end all forms of violence and discrimination against girls and women in order to create that world. Thank you. In this role at NoVo, I've been so fortunate to be able to meet with so many activists from all over the world, from Botswana to Bangladesh to Baltimore, who are all working to advance the rights of girls and women. Second is my experience at UNICEF, and before that, Equality Now, where I work closely with some of the most fierce, brave, tenacious activists and change makers who are always standing up for girls and women against so much opposition and against so many odds. Girl champions like all of you in this room today. But I think most of all for me, my perspectives and experiences are really rooted in and shaped by the voices of girls like the ones we just heard. I want to just say one more time, thank you. I think it's so important to continually ground ourselves in the real lives of girls, and I am grateful for that, so thank you. Earlier this month, I went to see Scheherazade Tillet's extraordinary photo exhibit, Picturing Black Girlhood. It was on display at Columbia University as part of the Black Girl Movement Conference, which was a historic conference on Black girls in America. This exhibit was inspired by another exhibit also focused on adolescent girls that Scheherazade had visited a few years earlier. Only when Cher saw that exhibit, she noticed that something was missing. There were virtually no pictures of girls of color, and specifically of Black girls. So Cher went to work, collecting and curating photographs of and from the experiences of Black girls. And as I walked off the subway in New York and walked towards the gallery at Columbia, I saw this enormous crowd gathered outside. The line snaked around the corner I mean, it literally was huge. The visitors were spilling out of the doorway, filling the sidewalks and the streets of Manhattan. When I finally made it inside, the images of that room were as striking as the images on the walls. Hundreds and hundreds of people gathered around these photos of Black girl friendship, Black girl solidarity, Black girl life. All people were there to bear witness to people, to girls who have so often been rendered invisible. It has been said that in any movement, there are moments when we creep and moments when we leap. This month and this year truly feels like a moment when we leap. That's right. Yeah. It's a moment in which decades of invisible work by women, primarily women of color, is finally being seen and acknowledged. A moment in which the voices of national leaders like Kim Crenshaw, Marlene Sanchez, Jeanette Pai Espinoza, Shakira Washington, Leon Chun, Joanne Smith, Salamisha Tillett, and so many more are finally being heard. It's a moment fueled by Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi, who stood up to insist that Black lives matter and change the national conversation about race and about gender in the United States. It's a moment made possible by all of you in this room. Gathered here are women and girls whose backgrounds and stories vary greatly, but whose liberation is bound inextricably together. Each of us is part of a truly global movement, one that is already well underway. And we have so much to learn from each other, but we also have so much to learn from those who are working outside the United States as well. Today, I'm going to share just 3 lessons from the girls' movement across the globe, lessons that I hope will help us to make the most of this opportunity that we have right here at home right now, lessons that will allow our work to reverberate beyond our borders. Because our fates are bound together, because we're part of a transnational movement, and because the rising tide here can lift girls everywhere. The first lesson, start with the hardest to reach. Let me start with the first question each of us must ask ourselves. Who should we be trying to reach? Which girls? Look at the progress of girls globally, and one pattern is increasingly clear. Girls that are easier to reach sometimes gain access to education, resources, and services, while those in the most dire conditions often see no change at all. Countries that set targets for getting more girls into school, for example, succeed by enrolling mostly urban girls. And yet, they make almost no dent in the enrollment of the rural poor, which are the hardest girls to reach. Meaningful change always starts from the bottom up. And experience shows that if we enroll the poorest girls, the one forced into child marriage in rural Ethiopia in school first, the girls in urban Addis Ababa will follow suit. But if we start with the girls in Addis, we will never, ever reach the girls in rural communities. Anywhere we work, as funders, as agencies, as organizations, we must measure ourselves against the progress of the most marginalized girls, the girls who are sexually exploited in the juvenile justice system, in and out of foster care and homelessness, and so on. Because if we're not intentional about reaching those girls, we'll never reach those girls. At NoVo, our philosophy is very much inspired by where our money comes from. Some of you may know Warren Buffett's investment strategy. When I say this, people often start to take notes, like, what should I do? but it's not like that. Warren Buffett finds and invests in the most undervalued companies in the marketplace that show the greatest potential. We believe that this strategy can also be applied to our philanthropy. Adolescent girls, particularly adolescent girls who live at the intersection of racism and sexism and other forms of oppression, hold enormous potential when they are supported and nurtured. We've known this for years about girls in the Global South, but as all of you at the Alliance for Girls know so well, it's just as true closer to home. When girls, particularly the most marginalized girls, are supported, they have the power to change their own lives and the lives of every single person around them. And their individual liberation is necessary. It's a precondition for our collective liberation. The second lesson, prioritize violence. So if the first question for all of us is, who should our work reach? Which girls? Then our second question is, what is standing in their way? Sadly, as I have seen throughout my career, and many of you in your lives and career as well, working with girls anywhere in the world means necessarily confronting violence. In a recent survey of girls in Zambia, a staggering 86% of girls said that their response to fear of violence was to stay at home, to not leave their homes. Their mobility, their opportunity to play, to learn, to earn, are held hostage by the constant threat of violence. We know that globally, 1 of every 3 women will be beaten or raped in her lifetime. In the US, 3 of every 5 Black girls experience sexual abuse before the age of 18, and Native girls are 2.5 times more likely to experience sexual assault. In 2015, at least 22 trans women and girls, overwhelmingly women and girls of color, were murdered. Violence is everywhere. It's in our homes, in our schools, in our institutions, in our neighborhoods. At an event with Anita Hill in New York City, organized by the fabulous organization Girls for Gender Equity. Yeah, totally. Oh yeah, that's great, yeah. At the Black Girl Movement Conference, yeah. They're amazing. Yeah, they would love to be here next year. They organized this event with Anita Hill, and young women who are part of GGE described walking past the Barclays Sports Center complex in Brooklyn during home games for fear of street harassment, and how they would avoid walking by this center. Now, if you know anything about Brooklyn, avoiding the Barclays Stadium, it's almost impossible. It's like the biggest thing in Brooklyn. It's really hard to avoid it, but they would try. Those who had no choice but to walk in places they felt uncomfortable would put on headphones without any music on. That way, they told us, they could ignore someone catcalling them, but still hear him if he was approaching from behind. Their accounts echoed stories I heard from girls in Kolkata's red light district. There, girls would walk an hour or more out of their way to avoid pimps and customers lurking on street corners along their route. The sad truth is, if you close your eyes and listen to girls talk about violence, you could literally be anywhere in the world. The way it controls girls' lives, the way it factors into every single decision, is strikingly constant. Which is why, to reach the most marginalized girls, we must make ending violence our first priority. Thankfully, girls have always been incredibly creative and resourceful. We heard about how creative and resourceful girls are today already. And I found similar hopes in the girls who shared their safety tips with Anita Hill. As wrenching as it is to hear them describe a kind of violence that's ubiquitous throughout their lives, there was also an amazing power in their sisterhood and in their solidarity, something that I've also found in every corner of the globe. In Kibera, Kenya, the largest so-called slum in Africa, there's a powerful group of girls who are part of a safe space program called Binti Pamoja, which means Daughters United in Swahili. As a collective, they identified safety as a major concern for themselves and other girls living in the community. They decided to organize. Working with the MAP Kibera Trust, these girls mapped out locations where they felt most at risk and brought this data to community leaders to demand that they prioritize girls' safety within their community. The network has grown from a group of powerful girls who have each other's backs to gradually transforming the streets of Kibera. But even more so, it's already transformed the lives of the girls who launched it. This group of girls, labeled in the community as Binti girls, exude a power and a confidence that's recognizable to every single person they meet. Another illustration, in Zambia, after a 13-year-old girl named Mary was repeatedly raped by her teacher, she and her aunt went to school authorities to file a complaint. The authorities did nothing. Turns out the teacher had been raping students for many years without consequence. Everyone, including the principal, knew. Together with her aunt, Mary filed a lawsuit against the teacher who raped her and the principal and the school system that allowed it to happen. Mary's stand convinced other girls to come forward about their abuse and resulted in a conviction for the teacher. He was subsequently fired. He was fired, and he was also fined the equivalent of $30,000, which is an enormous sum in Zambia. More inspiring still is that Mary's lawsuit spurned a national movement to end sexual abuse in schools. And today, a coalition of Zambian organizations, like many of the organizations in this room, in coordination with Equality Now, are creating girl-only safe spaces in schools across the country. In these spaces, yeah, it's great. In these spaces, girls come together to share their experiences and to report violence when it happens. There's a really powerful lesson for all of us here. Safe spaces are places where girls can collaborate, organize, and always come back to, no matter what is happening in their lives, are extraordinary engines of change. And as advocates dedicated to girls, we can play an important role in creating these spaces where they are needed most. Whether it's changing laws to protect schoolgirls in Zambia or standing up to sexual harassment in Brooklyn, it begins with safe spaces dedicated to girls. When girls understand that the violence around them is systemic, that they are not alone, and that it's not their fault, they can begin to organize and to fight back. When they are given space to connect, to organize, and support one another, girls will lead the way. Which brings me to my final lesson: be accountable to girls. Girls know their experience better than anyone. Their voices are our most important data. Their feedback, our most important performance indicator. Ultimately, we must never forget to be accountable to them. One example makes the case. In the Global South, like in the US, more and more organizations have begun working with men and boys to advance the rights of girls and women. But we and women's groups around the world have also found that if it's not done right, it can be worse than doing nothing at all. An organization in India ran a program for men and boys designed to create more equitable attitudes towards women and girls. They did an entire evaluation of the program's effectiveness without once asking the women and girls in the lives of the men and boys whether the program had made an impact in their lives. We've seen this happen all over the world, including here in the United States. It seems like so obviously wrong, and yet it happens all the time. Engaging men and boys in the struggle for women's and girls' equality is necessary and right, but the how matters. Too often, engaging men and boys becomes an end in and of itself instead of a strategy with the ultimate end to ensure the safety and equality of all people, especially women and girls. Thank you. The experience of women and girls must be both the organizing principle and the measure of success. Without their input, what might resemble success on the surface could end up harming the very people we seek to support. This applies not just to our work with men and boys, but to all of our work. The people affected by programs and policies should always, always have a voice in creating them. And we have to make sure we're consulting with and listening to girls at every single stage of the process. I say this not to diminish research or expertise that is not girl-led. We all carry valuable experience and insight that does and should shape our approaches. But we should be equally aware of our blind spots. There's so much we can't know from where we sit, and so much we can learn by listening to girls. So now is where I say that in philanthropy, we are particularly bad at doing this. Take just one example, the concept of scale. So scale is a word we hear thrown around a lot. It's kind of a holy grail in philanthropy. There's sometimes a temptation to assume that because girls share so many challenges, a single solution can fit all circumstances. But we know that the reality is so much more complicated. Differing family, cultural, community dynamics all play a role in shaping the lives of girls. I've watched far too many programs which are excellent in the places they start, and then they fail miserably when they get exported elsewhere. Being rooted in context, culture, and community are critical for success. And so instead of scaling programs, perhaps what we could do is to scale lessons from the work of our sisters across the country and around the world. There is so much we can gain from each other without losing the unique perspective of each and every single girl. When we listen to girls speak, when we hear what they're saying, one thing becomes abundantly clear. Girls don't need us to empower them. They already have extraordinary power within them. As one insightful young woman, Danielle Gary, at the Black Girl Movement Conference told us, and I'm quoting, "A big misconception is that Black girls and Black women don't have any power. The real issue is the power we have is not the type of power that is politically correct and acceptable. What girls and women need is for our communities, for all of us, to dismantle the structural inequalities that prevent girls from stepping into their full power. Together, we need to shatter the discrimination and the oppression that is etched into our laws, our prisons, our schools, our housing, our healthcare. This and all of this, and nothing less, is what it will take to turn this moment of opportunity into real, meaningful, and lasting change in the lives of girls everywhere." The inimitable Maya Angelou once said, "Equal rights, fair play, justice are all like the air. We either all have it or none of us has it." We all have it or none of us has it. We're all safe in the street or none of us are. We're all in the picture or none of us are. We're all working and marching for our collective liberation or none of us are. I'm so grateful to be here today with all of you. I'm grateful for the partnership of the Alliance for Girls and the incredible work you do, and I'm honored and humbled to be in this room with all of you fierce, fierce advocates for girls and with girls. Thank you.